So last week, news came out that Microsoft has moved forward with efforts to make Blizzard more prolific. The plan is to launch new games for their established IPs far more frequently than has been the case. Blizzard is notorious for taking their time ever since the early 2000s, with there being 10 years between the launches of Diablos 3 and 4, 12 years between StarCrafts 1 and 2, and it's been 22 years since we got a new Warcraft RTS. You feeling old yet? I sure am. Now compare that with their release cadence in the late 90s and early 2000s. In the 10-year span between 94 and 2004, they launched Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Diablo, StarCraft, Diablo 2, Warcraft 3, and the World of Warcraft. That was 7 games within 10 years. In the 20 years since World of Warcraft, there have been 6 new games with StarCraft 2, Diablo 3, Hearthstone, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch, and most recently Diablo 4. Now, longer development times over the past 2 decades have been a trend across the entire industry. This isn't Blizzard specific. What is Blizzard specific, though, is the fact that for a while it felt like that long wait was worth it. But the company isn't quite known nowadays as the genre-defining developer they used to be, and it seems like Microsoft, after spending $72 billion in the acquisition, they're not that interested in a release cadence of 6 new games over the course of the next 20 years. Now, I don't think rushing out their mainline installments is going to be the answer. Had they launched Diablo 4 a year or 2 earlier, there likely would have been far less content in the game at release, of course, right? I do think Blizzard should take their time, as much time as they need for those big games for their mainline installments. Take all the time you want for those games to make them as good as possible. That should be the focus, right? However, there is another option that interests me, and that would be Blizzard working on games that are smaller in scope, that take less time to develop, and more importantly, ones where they're willing to take more chances, not to play it as safe and to try new things. Well, it turns out that might be exactly what's going on. Microsoft has some big plans. According to sources speaking with Windows Central, Microsoft has recently created a new internal team made up of members throughout Activision Blizzard King. This group's entire focus is to create new games based on Blizzard's popular franchises. But these wouldn't be new big mainline games. We're not talking about StarCraft 3 and Warcraft 4. These would be smaller games in their scope, scale, budget, and ideally as well in their development time. So basically, we're talking about spin-offs for Warcraft, Diablo, and StarCraft in entirely new genres, released far more frequently than once every 10 years or 10 plus years. This is a pretty exciting proposition. Now, to quote the article, sources tell me that Microsoft is keen to explore and experiment finding success out of smaller teams that are also integrated with the larger org, almost Nintendo style for seamless collaboration. Microsoft and other big publishers are increasingly concerned about the monstrously ballooning cost facing AAA game development, and having studios cross-collaborate more closely is one way Microsoft is exploring reducing cost. Now, later on, he adds that this new internal Blizzard studio is entirely geared up for agility and trying to break free of the bureaucratic bloat that often comes with larger teams. And this is absolutely a truth that we see in action very often across the games industry, with these huge studios moving at a snail's pace, taking weeks or months or even longer to release updates, patches, and bug fixes, while simultaneously in that same industry, we're seeing much smaller teams working on their own indie games or AA games that can release updates far more frequently. There's a lot of red tape when a development studio gets to be as big as Blizzard, and while that red tape is there for a reason, it can and often does tend to really slow things up when it comes to these studios being geared up for agility, being flexible and responsive and updating on a frequent basis. So the entire initiative here actually sounds and reminds me a lot of what Riot has been doing with Riot Forge, where they're releasing these smaller scale games based on their League of Legends IP, and some of these have seen some great success, like really highly rated, a lot of people really enjoy them, so it's really exciting. And I think for Blizzard in particular, as someone who's been a fan of pretty much all of their franchises for the past 20, 30 plus years, there's a lot of potential. Like, they've actually already been playing around with this idea, right, of making these smaller scale spin-offs. Obviously, you could certainly argue that Hearthstone is exactly that. They took the Warcraft IP, they turned it into a collectible card game reminiscent of Magic the Gathering, but with a Warcraft twist. I mean, it's not exactly like Magic, right? But you get the picture. They took the IP and they spun it off into a smaller version of it, a smaller scale thing. There's obviously the mobile stuff as well. Bleh, you know, we're talking about Diablo Immortal, Warcraft Rumble. I don't really care at all about the mobile portion of Blizzard's IPs, but if we're talking about getting more indie/AA quality PC or console focused titles, there's just so much potential. There's so much possibility. In fact, I think we've seen what that could mean with Plunderstorm. I think this was a great showcase of that. Now, if you happen to miss the craze, Plunderstorm was a genuinely fun battle royale. I had a blast playing it. Blizzard released this as a temporary game mode inside of the WoW client. You would drop in with just a basic attack, go around killing NPCs to level up, collecting spells along the way to build up a loadout of different abilities, all while fighting in lobbies of 60 players with a closing circle pushing you all together and trying to stay alive to be the last one standing. It was a traditional battle royale, but in the World of Warcraft. But it wasn't just WoW in a battle royale area. Like, they really, in a lot of ways, made it its own thing. You weren't actually logging into WoW and like going up to an NPC and queuing in. It was its own separate game inside of the WoW client. And like I said, it was actually really, really good. I think that if they made some tweaks and some adjustments and some polishing, it could very well be spun off into its own game. In fact, I know of a few people who have zero, actually less than zero interest in World of Warcraft. They do not care. They would never play that MMO, but they played and thoroughly enjoyed Plunderstorm. That's a really good sign. And I think they're just generally around the internet, there seemed to be a positive sentiment around Plunderstorm, besides the fact that it was locked behind a monthly subscription. I think if they spun off Plunderstorm into its own game, probably don't call it Plunderstorm, come up with another name, but make a World of Warcraft Battle Royale as its own free-to-play thing, you could probably just print money with that. In fact, frankly, I think that should be that'd be my suggestion, that this is the first thing that this new spin-off studio works on. It seems like an easy win there. But there's a few other ideas that I would personally love to see them take a crack at. How about a Warcraft-themed survival game, huh? Blizzard did spend 7 years laying the groundwork for a shared open world survival title. It was under a brand new IP, and well, that was scrapped earlier this year, unfortunately, when Microsoft had a big round of layoffs. I would imagine there's a possibility they could use some parts of this, rework it with Warcraft theming, and then spin it out into its own smaller scale survival game. Making use of past scrapped projects and turning them into something new is something that Blizzard has done in the past. Overwatch, most notably, was made from the remnants of Blizzard's sci-fi MMO code-named Titan. That game also, funnily enough, was canceled after roughly 7 years in development. Seems like that 7-year mark is the killer for a lot of Blizzard games if they're not going to release. And you know, survival games are also notoriously lower budget titles. A majority of the most popular survival games out there were made by relatively small teams with relatively little funding, talking things like Rust, Ark, and Valheim. These are smaller scale games, smaller budget, that seem to attract a massive audience. It's just a no-brainer. I've actually been waiting 30 years to chop trees as an orc and build my own base. Can you just make that happen, Blizzard? It can't. Come on, seriously. So yeah, I think a Warcraft survival game is the perfect type of thing that we could hope for from this initiative. But here's a few other ideas if we're spitballing here, just throwing darts, right? How about a StarCraft third-person action/shooter game? Just imagine Space Marine 2, but it's StarCraft. Right? It's not even that far of a leap, as the entire StarCraft franchise was originally a spin-off of Warhammer 40k. They're right there, just put the pieces together. How about like a Diablo-themed dungeon extraction game? Think about Dark and Darker Dungeonborn, but it's Diablo stuff. You got first person, you spawn in, you fight other players for loot, you extract, you could do this. How about a Vampire Survivors auto-shooter battler thing? Any of their IPs could work from that. Heck, we could even see like a 2D side-scroller, but it like Hollow Knight, but it's Diablo or Warcraft or something, right? Really, I think that they could just take a look at any of the popular indie or AA games and genres, and they could just create spin-offs of those using Blizzard IPs. If nothing else, I would love if that's what they just did that, and if we got some decent games out of it, that would be really cool. So that is all really interesting. Like I said, I think there's so much potential for cool things that this development team could work on. The Battle Royale and the survival games being the ones that are most immediately promising and appealing sounding to me. But at the same time, what's going on with Blizzard proper, right? The main development teams, what are they up to? Well, of course, all the existing stuff marches forward with them continuing support on current titles. World of Warcraft kicks off the first first of a planned trilogy of expansions for retail, launching the War Within later this month. And of course, Classic WoW and Hardcore WoW and Season of Discovery are likely to continue marching forward. Diablo 4 is also getting its first big expansion with Vessel of Hatred that is coming in October. And Overwatch, StarCraft, and Hearthstone, they all still exist, or so I am told. But what else is the company up to? Well, as mentioned, they did have a survival game in development for about 7 years, but that got canceled last January when Microsoft announced a big round of layoffs. One of the most heavily affected groups was the vast majority of the development team for Project Odyssey, which was the code name for their survival game. Most of them unfortunately got fired, and those who remained ended up moving on to other projects. This was a pretty big blow, especially considering from all we had heard, the game was actually shaping up nicely. Over the past 2 years or so, we have seen several leaked impressions from playtesters, and they were all fairly positive. Also, there were a lot of ex-Blizzard employees and various people who are known for leaking info in the industry that spoke quite highly of Blizzard's in-development survival game as well. So the fact that this project seemingly was doing all right, but then got outright canned, that is a real shame. I think there's at least some part of the reason, however small, there might be some part of the reason for this cancellation due to the fact that it was a new IP. Now, when these layoffs took place, Phil Spencer said on a few occasions that going forward, they are going to be primarily focusing on Blizzard's strengths and in particular on their existing franchises. So maybe that survival game does get reworked and repurposed into a new Warcraft thing. Who knows? I'll keep it on my wish list. That's not all though, actually. Since the survival game got axed, we have caught wind of another new project in development at Blizzard. A few months ago, there were numerous job openings posted for a new, unannounced, open world Blizzard game. That's right. Positions available for the creative, narrative, and art directors, as well as concept artists, gameplay engineers, animators, combat designers, and design directors for both missions and combat AI. That is a lot of positions, and it is very clear that the game is still in very early development. In fact, it may still very well be in pre-production. We're also not sure if this is a new or existing franchise, although again, Microsoft has made it clear that they want to focus on existing ones, so I'm just going to assume as much. But we did get a tiny bit of information from these job postings. So with the missions and combat AI, it was made clear that this game is going to have a PvE focus. In the combat design roles, they mentioned wanting monsters to be interesting, memorable, and challenging from the initial threats all the way to legendary boss encounters players will talk about for decades. Clearly, they are going to have some leveling, power, and/or difficulty progression in this game, with you starting in lower tiers and working up to higher tier encounters to eventually reaching legendary boss fights. The world designer will be, quote, defining and iterating on a collaborative vision for open world gameplay and content, ranging from sprawling exterior zones to tight and intense claustrophobic interiors. And then finally, the level designer will be designing and implementing captivating locations and environments, integrating gameplay mechanics, challenges, combat, and puzzles into level designs. So while it is all really vague, we at least have the understanding that there's going to be a focus on PvE combat and encounters with PvE enemies and legendary bosses. There should be some leveling and progression tied to that as well, based on how they're talking about the breadth of this thing, and it is going to be an open world game as well. Once more though, this is likely not even close to complete. It might not even be started yet. It could be a good 5+ years before we get any sort of a reveal of what this is. So don't hold your breath, right? There is still hope yet as well for fans of the StarCraft franchise. That's right, as shortly after Microsoft's acquisition of Blizzard, Phil Spencer mentioned plans to, quote, bring back dormant franchises, which include the likes of StarCraft. In an interview with Jez Corden, Spencer said, the diversity of business models allows us to invest in different kinds of content and still have financial success with that content. We look at the back catalog from Activision and Blizzard, we get really excited about the things we can do. Now, when Jez asked him about StarCraft in particular, he said that they'd want to ensure Blizzard was part of the discussions to revive any of those franchises, and that it wouldn't necessarily simply be a case of spinning up a new team to handle them. Notably though, when Spencer took to the BlizzCon stage in 2023, he did specifically shout out StarCraft fans, and when Jez asked him about that, his response was, I want our fans and customers to know that I don't bring up games just to tease to no end. If people have have watched how we have teased things in the past, there's usually some kind of a reconciliation of those hints later on. I'm not one to try to lead people on. It might not happen in the timeline that people would love, but usually when I tease, there is something there. So he's kind of like confirming without confirming that they are, at the very least, Microsoft is in at least considerations of reviving the StarCraft franchise. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought it up. That's what you can pull from that, right? Whether or not that's going to happen in this decade, who knows? Okay. So yeah, I mean, hey, there's clearly a fair bit going on at Blizzard right now, all things considered, from this new development team focused on smaller scale AA/indie level games for their existing IPs. Once again, I'll reiterate, I will take that Battle Royale and or Survival Warcraft themed game, please. World of Warcraft, both classic and retail, along with Diablo 4, they are continuing to get updates and will be getting expansions for the foreseeable future. While the survival game was canned, we do have this brand new announced PvE focused open world game that's ramping up development. Phil Spencer has also acknowledged interest in reviving StarCraft, as I just mentioned, and I should add that we saw job postings back in 2021 for an unannounced action/FPS game that was said to be in development for PC and consoles with online integration. We do also know they've got several mobile games in the work, if you care about that. I don't. And yes, for sure, there's most likely more unannounced things and not yet revealed things. I will say though, personally, like barring a reveal of StarCraft 3 or Blizzard releasing another full-blown MMO, I think what I'm actually most interested in seeing is this new, smaller, more agile dev team, what they come up with. There's just, again, so much potential for Warcraft, Diablo, and StarCraft if mapped onto so many genres. Battle Royale, Survival, Souls-like, Roguelike, Platformer even. That, like, you could just take Blizzard IPs and put them onto so many other game types and genres, and it could certainly work. And I hope that's the sort of thing that they plan to be working on. Whatever comes of it, though, I will be sure to keep you posted as we see and learn more. But that is all for today. Thank you, as always, for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.